Following the loud crash and column of ash that rained down from the Twin Towers after their collapse came brutal fires. To add to the chaos, screaming, and heartbreak, the fire mains were completely destroyed, leading to more panic and uncertainty. Luckily, sitting in retirement was an absolute beast of a firefighter, and she was recalled into action. Marine 2 glided up alongside Ground Zero, pumping 18,000 gallons of water per minute onto the blaze, proving herself a hero like all of the other first responders during this terrible tragedy. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. John J. Harvey was ordered by the New York City Fire Department in 1928. She'd be built by Todd Shipbuilding in Brooklyn, New York for a cost of $594,000. She was laid down in 1930, and her port of registry would be New York City, New York. She was named after the Marine fireman John J. Harvey, who was killed when a ship exploded during a fire he was fighting. Before we get any further into her career, let's look at her specs. John J. Harvey was a fireboat that displaced 268 net tons, being 130 feet in length, had a beam of 28 feet wide, and a draft of 9 feet deep. Like most fireboats, her keel and hull were red as well as funnels and details with white housing. She also carried an American flag with her at all times. As for installed power, she had a Fairbanks Morse opposed piston Model 38 F5.25 model engine, which consisted of 8 cylinders with 16 pistons. This engine powered 2 screws and allowed her to travel at an average service speed of 18 knots. As for her hoses and such, she had 8 deck monitors and 24 large connections for fire hoses, and she was capable of pumping out 18,000 gallons of water per minute. The Harvey, as she was nicknamed, was launched on October 6, 1931, and she'd be called John J. Harvey or Engine 57, kind of like how warships have names as well as hull designations. She was commissioned on December 17, 1931, and in service that same date. In 1938, her designation would change to Engine 86, and in 1959 and 2001 respectively, she'd be designated Marine 2. She underwent a refit for modernization in 1957. She was a historic first as well, the first fireboat powered by internal combustion engines, and the first that could pump and maneuver simultaneously. That's all the technical jargon out of the way. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comment section below. Okay, time to take a deep dive into all of the major events that she's been a part of. Pier 54, for those Cunard enthusiasts, is a special place. Cunard Line's official dock in New York Harbor, and where ships like Lusitania would finish their westbound transatlantic journeys. Pier 54 sits at the foot of 13th and 14th Street near all of the commotion of the West Side Highway, and was just one of a series of piers which lined the lower west side of Manhattan on the Hudson River. There were multiple pier buildings designed by Warren and Wetmore, the same architectural firm that would go on to design the Grand Central Terminal building in Manhattan, which is gorgeous. These buildings sheltered passengers and gave them a waiting area before boarding or to retrieve their luggage after disembarking, and were incredibly important. Pier 54 is also where RMS Carpathia docked after rescuing the survivors of the sinking RMS Titanic, so this pier is historically significant. However, not all was well with this particular pier. Here's where John J. Harvey comes into play. On Friday, May 6, 1932, a 5-alarm fire engulfed the pier, being fought with land-based firemen and 6 fireboats along the waterfront, including John J. Harvey. The fire started at about 8 a.m. that morning in some garbage beneath the pier. The watchman who discovered it tried to stop the fire by hand, failing miserably. As the flames spread, a regular fire alarm wasn't turned in quickly, and Cunard employees rushed to carry furniture and paperwork out of the building with damp handkerchiefs over their faces for protection from the smoke. By the time the first few companies had arrived on scene, the fire was wildly out of control, and some 700 firemen fought the blaze. They fought for 2 hours, soon realizing they could not save the $2 million pier or the over $100,000 worth of cargo sitting in it, and they instead moved to prevent other structures from burning down. Dozens of firemen were injured and 1 person was killed in the fire, and the pier collapsed into the Hudson that evening. Eventually, it would be rebuilt. The next major fire we have covered in the past, so if you'd like the full in-depth story on SS Normandie and her destruction, check out her episode. SS Normandie was docked in New York Harbor at Pier 88 on February 9, 1942. During her conversion to USS Lafayette, sparks from a welding torch lit a stack of life vests filled with flammable Copic ablaze, and quickly the fire spread, eating away at the flammable varnish-coated woodwork on the walls. Quickly, the New York City Fire Department responded, but their hoses didn't fit the French inlets on the ship, and so it was left to the onshore and fireboat firemen to fight the blaze. John J. Harvey was one of these fireboats pumping water onto the blaze and filling the Normandie with thousands of gallons of water, though the fire kept spreading. Her sea cocks were eventually opened, and she settled to the bottom, and this allowed more water to be pumped onto the blaze without hopefully capsizing the ship. Between 5:45 p.m. and 6 p.m., the fire was considered under control, and firefighting operations started to cease around 8 p.m. Unfortunately, because of all the water within the belly of SS Normandie, she would capsize around 2:45 a.m. on February 10th, being deemed a constructive total loss, and was sold for scrap on October 3, 1946. John J. Harvey would yet again fight another shipborne blaze in 1943, and we'll get into that next. SS El Estero, a general cargo steamship built for the Southern Pacific Steamship Lines, had taken on 1,365 tons of mixed munitions on April 24, 1943, in the midst of World War II. She was preparing to depart at around 5:30 p.m. when a boiler flashback started a fire on oil water in her bilges, which quickly grew out of control. Immediately, 5 fire trucks from the Jersey City Fire Department, 2 30-foot fireboats, and roughly 60 volunteers from the U.S. Coast Guard were sent in to battle and contain the flames aboard the ship, which was more directly opposite to 2 other fully loaded ammunition ships and 2 ammunition-laden railroad boxcars. More than 5,000 tons of ammunition was in imminent danger of being set off by the fire on El Estero, which is comparable to the detonation of a tactical nuclear weapon. Tactical nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons that are designed to be used on a battlefield in military situations, mostly with friendly forces in proximity and perhaps even on contested friendly territory. As of 2024, no tactical nuclear weapons have ever been used in combat. This differs greatly from an atomic nuclear bomb like those that exploded over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Still dangerous, but much less so. Firefighting efforts began in earnest, facing quite the threat. Quickly, it was discovered that the location and intensity of the fire prevented access to the ship's seacocks, making it impossible to scuttle El Estero. So, the New York City Fire Department dispatched its 2 most powerful fireboats, Firefighter and our girl John J. Harvey. These 2 queens arrived on scene at 6:30 p.m., immediately running hoses up to the Coast Guardsmen on El Estero, then taking positions right alongside the ship. A trio of commercial tugboats made up a tow line to her bow and started pulling El Estero away from the Caven Point Pier toward open water through the Narrows. Despite the fact the munitions could ignite and explode at any moment, killing them all, the fireboats, Coast Guardsmen, and tug crews continued their efforts to contain the fire, save the ship, and as much cargo as possible. However, soon the ship was ordered to be sunk, with Firefighter and John J. Harvey moving to a shallow area near Robbins Reef Light in Upper New York Bay, then dumping 38,000 gallons of water per minute into El Estero's cargo holds, successfully swamping her and sending her to the bottom shortly after 9 p.m., with her superstructure largely sitting out of the water. The fire was considered to be fully extinguished by 11:30 p.m. on the 24th, ending what was considered to have been the single greatest threat to New York City during World War II, with no major incident or loss of life. This could have not been possible without the Harvey. One final notable incident John J. Harvey was involved with before we get into September 11, 2001, was the collision of MT Alva Cape and ST Texaco, Massachusetts in 1966. MT Alva Cape, a British oil tanker, would catch fire twice, once in the collision and once while unloading cargo, then being scuttled offshore. On June 16, 1966, at about 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Alva Cape was heading through Kill Van Kull with a cargo of 4,200,000 U.S. gallons of naphtha from India. At the same time, Texaco, Massachusetts was outbound in ballast, bound for Port Arthur, Texas, and was turning into the channel from Newark Bay when she collided with Alva Cape on the Cape's starboard side at the west end of Kill Van Kull, just west of the Bayonne Bridge. At the time of the collision, Texaco, Massachusetts was being aided by the tugboat Latin American, while Alva Cape had the tug SS Vermont alongside her. Immediately following the collision, Texaco, Massachusetts reversed, allowing thousands of gallons of naphtha to spill and ignite, likely from sparks from the engine of SS Vermont. The fire burned until about 10:35 p.m. when firefighters from fireboats, including John J. Harvey, and from the Staten Island Fire Department extinguished the flames. In addition to the fireboats, small craft from the police department and the Coast Guard were dispatched to the scene, followed by 7 tugboats. Of the 2 ships and 2 tugboats involved, it's been estimated between 96 and 104 people were involved. Of these people, 60 were hospitalized and about 40 of them were released within 2 days. By the day after the fire, 21 were confirmed dead and 11 were missing. After the search for the missing failed, the death toll was raised to 32, and a final person died later, raising the toll to 33. The John J. Harvey, known as Marine 2 at this moment, would stay Marine 2 until she was decommissioned in 1995. 1999 was a good year. Firstly, I was born on February 12th, and most importantly, John J. Harvey went up for auction sometime in 1999, and she was sold to a private consortium of marine preservationists determined to rescue her from the scrapyard. She was restored and would host frequent free trips on the river. In June of 2000, she was added to the National Park Service's National Register of Historic Places. This is the United States federal government's official list of sites, buildings, structures, districts, and objects deemed worthy of preservation for their historical significance or great artistic value. John J. Harvey entered an exclusive club as being a registered historical place in the U.S. And being a YouTube member or patron enters you into an exclusive club with our channel. This episode couldn't be possible without our amazing YouTube members and patrons. Thank you all so much. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Alright, it's time to look into the events of September 11th, 2001 and the Harveys' involvement. Now, the attacks on September 11th, 2001 are a very sensitive subject with a lot of details. We aren't going into depth into September 11th today, but instead into the Harveys' dealings with it. However, this is not meant to downplay the losses suffered at the hands of Al-Qaeda. Rest in peace to all of the victims of this tragedy, and may their families, friends, and loved ones find solace. That being said, 9/11 summed up was the hijacking of 4 flights by 19 terrorists of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, 2 of which crashed into the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center, 1 of which crashed into the Pentagon, and 1 was meant for the U.S. government building in Washington, D.C., though the brave passengers overcame the hijackers and crashed the plane into fields in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. The events of 9/11 led to the deaths of 2,977 innocent people, greatly changed air travel in the U.S., and led to the enactment of the Patriot Act, which authorizes measures to enhance the ability of domestic security services to prevent terrorism. This completely changed Americans' way of life forever. John J. Harvey would play a role in this great catastrophe. Multiple structures were destroyed, badly damaged, or covered in ash following the collapse of the Twin Towers. Not only this, but many fire mains were badly damaged, depriving ground fire crews of water needed to put out fires all over Manhattan. The boat's owners asked officials of the New York City Fire Department for permission to assist in maritime evacuations from Ground Zero, and she was reactivated as Marine 2. Due to the lack of water, officials radioed John J. Harvey, asking if her pumps were still operational, and the crew responded that yes, the Harvey was fully functional. She was then instructed to drop off her passengers as soon as possible and return to the disaster site as Marine 2. Alongside 2 other fireboats, the John D. McKean and Firefighter, she pumped water at the site for 80 hours until the water mains were restored. Due to her valiant efforts and that of John D. McKean and Firefighter, the firefighting response to 9/11 was successful. Countless news articles were written that week describing the heroism and return of the Harvey to the front lines. The National Trust for Historic Preservation gave John J. Harvey a special National Preservation Award to recognize her service in this difficult time in American history. She was also the subject of the 2002 children's book Fireboat, The Heroic Adventures of the John J. Harvey, written and illustrated by Myra Kalman. After her service during the attacks of September 11, 2001, she was again decommissioned and retired. Her home port as of 2019 is North River Pier 66A in New York City, beside the legendary lighthouse tender Frying Pan, located at 12th Avenue and 26th Street on the Hudson River, and she takes irregular but frequent free trips, sponsored by the owners in New York Harbor. Her magnificent harbor displays in warm weather attract crowds and draw cheers along the riverbank. In 2018, she was repainted in a red and white dazzle camouflage scheme as part of an art project by the visual artist Taube Auerbach in commemoration of the dazzle paint used on World War I ships. If you've been around my channel long enough, you know how much I love dazzle paint, so of course we had to include it. The Harvey was a hero during multiple major fire crises, and now she enjoys her retired life transporting tourists and history buffs alike. Without her, who knows how many of these tragedies would have turned out. Thankfully, she was there, and she was able to contribute so much for New York City and her residents. Rest in peace to the victims of each of these tragedies, most notably the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. Never forget. If you liked that story and wanted to hear something similar, check out our episode on the P.S. General Slocum in the cards. Next week, we get into part 1 of MS Estonia's story, starting with her building and career prior to her sinking. Thank you for tuning in to Shipwreck Sunday, have a great week, and we'll see you next time.